Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World. I'm Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, the Afghan government and Taliban representatives said on Wednesday that they had reached a preliminary deal to press on with peace talks, their first written agreement in 19 years of war. The agreement comes months after the landmark intra-Afghan peace talks began in Doha. It lays out the way forward for further discussions and will allow negotiators to move on to more substantive issues. Although peace talks ostensibly began on September 12th in Qatar, the negotiations quickly bogged down in procedural matters like which form of Islamic law should govern disputes between negotiators. It was unclear when a comprehensive ceasefire would go into effect. The Afghan government has demanded that the Taliban immediately halt its attacks, but the insurgents insist that they will lay down their arms only after a peace deal is concluded. Since the two sides first agreed to negotiations, the Taliban have escalated violence across Afghanistan, particularly targeting Afghan security forces. In this edition of India's World, we will analyze the progress of the peace talks and what it means for India. Joining me on the program today are Amar Sinha, former ambassador, Sushant Sareen, Foreign Affairs Analyst, and KP Nair, Strategic Analyst. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. As far as the Afghan peace process and the Afghan talks are concerned, what kind of progress have we witnessed and what does all of this really mean for India?
I'm happy to be back on this program. It's a small step. It's still a significant step forward because, as you know, for the last 2 months, we really had seen no progress. But I would still not call it beginning of the peace negotiations because this is really laying down the rules and procedures for the negotiations. The agenda has yet to be decided, and that will be decided soon. There are differences in the priorities on what each side wants on the agenda. Afghan government, the international community, including India, has said that there should be a comprehensive and sort of permanent ceasefire immediately. This was also reiterated at the donors conference, which happened last week. However, Taliban, as you know, they have been insisting that they will go strictly by the US-Taliban agreement, which unfortunately had put ceasefire and end of violence as an end point to be achieved after the negotiations. But given the fact that the first agreement, as you mentioned, the first written agreement between the two sides, we still feel that it's a major development. It's a green shoots, and hopefully it leads to actual peace in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Sushant Sareen, let me bring you in here. So what's at stake for India in Afghanistan?
Well, I think the situation is pretty much what it was before this particular deal was signed. I don't think this peace agreement or quasi peace agreement or agreement on procedures on how to proceed for the talks. I don't think it really changes anything on the ground. On the ground, the violence continues the way it was continuing. I don't see any real desire among the Taliban to compromise on certain basic issues which will propel and which will actually make this a genuine peace process. I don't see any of that happening. So in a sense, the dilemmas which we faced before this particular deal was signed are the same as we face after this deal has been signed. Number one. Number two, look, Frank, call me a cynic, call me what you will. But, I have never seen peace talks ever bring peace. I've only seen war bring peace. Successful waging of war brings peace and makes people, the other side, amenable to peace. Otherwise, you can keep talking till the cows come home, which is what the Taliban are going to do. Essentially, what they're trying to do is they are continuing with their war effort, not only continuing, but ramping it up. And you see the international support, or at least the Western support to the Afghan government gradually, coming down. And really the momentum is with the Taliban. So yes, they will lull everybody by pretending to get into these peace talks. Some compromises they have made even on the rules and procedures. But on the substantive issues, which is really where the problems are going to come. If it took you 2 months to simply decide how you're going to address each other and all the other stuff which has been decided, these rules and procedures, can you imagine how difficult it will be to get into the substantial parts of the dialogue on how to actually move forward and actually bring in peace in Afghanistan? I think it's a bit of a mug's game, but yes, if the charade continues and it keeps people happy, perhaps we will see that happen for the next few months.
Absolutely. All right. So, Mr. Nair, let me bring you in now, and let's talk about another major stakeholder in the region. Who's thousands of miles away, but has been trying to set the agenda really as far as Afghanistan is concerned. The U.S. The Secretary of State also came out and spoke. After this agreement was signed, he said that it's a move in the right direction. We are going to see several positives come out of this. So, where does the US stand really as far as Afghanistan is concerned? And is the change of guard in the United States or in Washington, D.C. going to change anything on the ground in Afghanistan?
You see, until the November elections, President Donald Trump's interest was in drawing down American presence in Afghanistan. He made a commitment during the 2016 election campaign to end wars. And he wanted to fulfill as much of those commitments as possible. But once the elections were over, and of course he doesn't concede defeat, but we can see what the outcome has been. But once the elections were over, like many things with Donald Trump, he lost interest completely in Afghanistan. Fortunately, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sees himself as a presidential hopeful in 2024, and he is, as you can see, running around the world trying to create a legacy, and he will continue to do that till his last day in office on January 20th. So although President Trump clearly lost interest in Afghanistan, Secretary Pompeo is continuing to make efforts, and he has been shuttling in Gulf capitals. He has been going to Turkey, he has been going to Doha, he has been going everywhere, and the presidential representative Zalmay Khalilzad has been shuttling similarly too. Of course, he also has a stake in this because he's of Afghan origin, and at one time he was talked about as a potential president of Afghanistan. And we may yet see that again now that he will no longer be a presidential envoy. So American interest is still there, and we have to wait and see whether the Biden administration takes similar interest in Afghanistan. It is my assessment that for Joe Biden, Afghanistan is not going to be an immediate priority because other things have come up. For example, Iran, the murder, the assassination of the nuclear scientist has pushed Iran forward to a point where it deserves the incoming president's immediate attention in the first month itself. And then what Israel will continue to do with with Iran may even push Biden to do more. So I would imagine that unless something terrible happens in Afghanistan, God forbid, nothing happens. For the time being, Afghanistan will remain in the relative back burner as far as the Biden administration is concerned. But I think President Biden has dealt with Afghanistan before. He has been there several times. Amar Sinha would know when he was in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he went there frequently, he went there whenever possible. And he knows Afghanistan, and I think he will take his own time appointing a special representative who will probably invest in the future course of peace action in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. All right. So, Ambassador, since we are here, then your thoughts firstly on the United States and the new administration's interest in Afghanistan, and secondly, of course, where do the other stakeholders really stand as far as Afghanistan is concerned? There are quite a few, actually.
Yeah. Let me address first. Let me say what Shushank made a very important point, that to call this even a peace deal is a misnomer. These are really talking about the talks, and that's we have still have to see the beginning of the peace deal. As far as US is concerned, I would think that we would not see a major departure between, like there was an expectation that both sides were waiting out Trump's presidency to end so that Biden could bring about a change. I don't see that will happen. I think there's a certain commitment on both sides that they would like to see the troops withdrawn. Now, of course, the agreement provided them till May, but President Trump has sort of reduce that timeline. He has said before he finishes on 20th of January, he would like to bring down the troops substantially. Uh, One major difficulty that I see with the change in administration is if Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad ceases to be the special representative immediately. Because over the 18 months that he negotiated, of course, there were parts based on certain secret understandings, there were annexures, also interpretations of each word, because Taliban is very good at changing its position very quickly. And they would tell the new administration, if a new representative was to come on the scene, that this is what was promised before. And that is why Taliban is also very keen, and they have been appealed to Biden presidency that they hope that the Biden presidency will stick to the terms agreed to by the US. So I think the best outcome we could think is if Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad stays on for 6 months till the actual intra-Afghan dialogue begins. Otherwise, I feel that there will be a hiatus. In terms of the other stakeholders, one important development, and I think a very important development, was the statement made by the German foreign minister as well as the NATO Secretary General, who have both, and I think that they have not really agreed with the American position of immediate withdrawal. Both have talked about conditions-based further withdrawal. In fact, NATO has also said that we have under the agreement till end of May, so a final call on NATO troops withdrawal will not be taken till February, by which we will know what is happening. The donors have come out and put conditionalities in terms of the commitments that given that disbursements will also depend on peace talks. Of course, it cuts both ways because it gives Taliban a veto on what Afghanistan gets. But I guess it was intended more as an incentive. So you can see that NATO and Europe are sort of coming out of the shadows of the American policy. Ultimately, ISAF was not only American troops, but many others. So the Turkish, the Germans, and I think the French, who are present in Kabul, Herat, and Mazar, have said that their training and assistance programs will continue. And they have also said that America has said that despite its reduced troop numbers, it will continue to provide them essential support in air support, in intelligence, and in medical support. So we see that there is a certain nuanced change happening, and NATO is very concerned that Taliban is not keeping its end of the deal, which, of course, to expect that they would keep their end of the deal itself was naive. But the world at least is now realizing that what Taliban has promised, it may or may not deliver at all.
Absolutely. All right. So we've heard, as far as what the West thinks about Afghanistan, we've heard the views from the panelists. So Sushant, Sareen, let's take the discussion forward and talk about, what's at stake really for China and what's China's position and stand as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And should that worry us or concern us at some level?
Look, let me just first answer the China part, and then I'll just come in on something which my other colleagues have said. See, the China game is very simple. They are playing this game on the shoulders of Pakistan, and they are being led by the nose by the Pakistanis on Afghanistan. And I think they have given the primacy of place to Pakistan with some minor changes here and there. Their interest is basically on, in the first instance, making sure that the flames of Islamic terrorism do not reach China from Afghanistan. That is the first. There are no sanctuaries out there, all of that. And secondly, to the extent possible, that connectivity routes through Afghanistan open up, which will make the China-Pakistan economic corridor somewhat more viable if at all. I don't think there is any viability which is going to come through Afghanistan, but maybe the Central Asian route will open up and some trade and transit will come through that. So I think that is what the Chinese game plan is. But I think we need to be more realistic on what is happening in Afghanistan and what the Western position is. Number one, Mr. Nayyar is right when he says that Joe Biden knows Afghanistan. But I actually sometimes ask myself, does any American actually know Afghanistan? They might have stayed in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. But if they'd actually known what Afghanistan is, how to handle Afghanistan, in the sense that it's okay to talk about a conditions-based withdrawal if you are going to do anything to change the way the conditions are developing. I don't see what they are doing to actually change, the deteriorating conditions and make the conditions conducive to something which they can take back with them. So effectively, what they are doing is making their own state unsustainable by not doing anything to change the conditions which are being imposed by the Taliban on Afghanistan. Frank, again, even I'm getting on in years, but let me make one thing very clear. What is worse than a young man in a hurry and with overweening ambition is an old man in a hurry with overweening ambition, which is what Ambassador Khalilzad is. So I would be extremely careful about what Ambassador Khalilzad is trying to do in Afghanistan, because frankly speaking, all that he has done so far has not really helped matters. It might have, set the stage for some kind of talks, but it hasn't really changed anything on the ground. And the situation on the ground continues to deteriorate as we speak, which means that this whole business of conditions-based withdrawal, what good is going to happen if these people stay on for another 6 months or 1 year or 2 years? Because they're not doing anything to turn the tide of the war. So At the end of the day, the writing on the wall is writ large, and we need to do something to make sure that when the inevitable happens, what our fallback positions are going to be.
Absolutely. And since we are here, then, Mr. Nair, let me take that particular aspect forward with you. What should our options be as far as Afghanistan is concerned? How do we safeguard our own interests?
Before I go into the crux of your question, since this is, from Diwali to New Year is a festive season. It's a season of celebrations. So I don't want to share the pessimism, the deep pessimism that I hear from Sushant Sareen. Let us try to be optimistic, howsoever fanciful it may be. And, we must understand that, Afghanistan, 40 years, since the 70s, it has been racked by violence. So little good news comes out of Afghanistan. I mean, constant turmoil, killing, bloodshed. So even a little agreement, I agree that so far between September and now in Doha, the talks have been about talks. But at least they have now produced some outcome. It is, of course, procedural, they have agreed on what to talk about. But, I have got used to not hearing any positive news from Afghanistan, any good news, that even this encourages me to hope for the best. Now, to come to your question, I think India decided early on that we will invest heavily in the Afghan people, that we will concentrate on development projects in Afghanistan. And look at our record. We have spent $3 billion, projects worth $3 billion in the last 20 years. And there is not a single project, there is not a single province in Afghanistan which has not been touched by our projects. All the 34 provinces have had some project or other from India. Amar Sinha knows this because he has traveled across Afghanistan as ambassador. And I have seen at track 2 meetings and track 1.5 meetings how people, Afghans, go to him because of what during his tenure and other ambassadors' tenures we have done in Afghanistan. 400 projects, And 10 days ago, our External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar spoke at the Afghan conference on development, where he made some specific commitments and he outlined new projects. For example, we are going to provide drinking water supply for 2 million residents in Kabul through a new project. We have already ensured that Kabul's electricity comes from an Indian project. Other things we have done, like building the Parliament complex, which is our enduring commitment to Afghan democracy, whatever that may mean in the troubled Afghan context. So
Right.
in terms of ensuring development work and making life better for the Afghan people. By Afghan people, I mean all persuasions, Pashtuns, Tajiks, everybody. In that we have done well, and I think as a government, India has decided to continue on this path, which shouldn't create any problems despite Pakistan's unhappiness about how well India is doing with development projects in Afghanistan.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Time now to get quick closing comments from all my guests with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador.
Yes, of course, the conditions that the Europe or US talks, unfortunately, they seem to be tinkering with at the margins of the problem. But of course, India has sort of shouted itself hoarse, saying that really the problem lies outside of Afghanistan. You have to really look at the enablers, the support structures, the sanctuaries, safe havens, which has enabled Taliban to become a force which has taken on NATO and engaged them for 19 years. That being said, ultimately, if there is any indication of reduction in violence, that will be seen as a positive step and an intention of Taliban to engage in peace talks, which unfortunately there are no signs, but hopefully there is. We are just hoping that they will see sense. Otherwise, we'll see a continuation of the same situation. I know the new projects, of course, Mr. KP Nair has covered very well. Basically, development projects are not, of course, it alleviates the problems people face, but most importantly, our aid and assistance don't have an end line. As most donors, if you see, they talk of 2-year commitment, 4-year commitment. Ours is more of a rolling and a permanent commitment. We take a longer view, and some really important projects. This is Shatut Dam. In fact, we have not even put a monetary value. So whatever it will cost, because it actually caters to the drinking water requirements of Afghanistan, we have said that we will do it. But basic focus of our development has been to enable Afghans to do things themselves, capacity building of the state, of the people. Ultimately, that is what a nation, the way we feel it should govern itself, will require. And that is what we are focused on.
Absolutely. All right. Sushant Sareen?
Try as I might, it's difficult to shake off my pessimism because of the reality on the ground, which is staring us in the face. Now, we can close our eyes and imagine the reality to be something different. And frankly, Frank, I don't think anyone would be happier than me to be proven wrong and to think that, yes, the Taliban will agree to accommodate the Afghan government, will agree to live in peace with the others, will ultimately strike a peace deal. I would be happiest to be proven wrong. But unfortunately, knowing something about the Taliban, I don't see that happen. So either it will be the Taliban with their medievalism and their barbarism who will come to rule in Afghanistan, and all this talk that no, the others are not going to give up, there's going to be a fight back. There might be a fight back, which again means a civil war. And anybody who thinks that the Taliban is a changed beast, that these are not people of the same persuasion as they were in the 1990s, only needs to see the areas where they hold sway, which they control, what are the kind of policies they have followed out there. And I think that should serve as a wake-up call for anybody who is deluding himself into thinking that the Taliban is a changed animal. And considering that you are not fighting the right war, you are not fighting the right enemy. The right enemy is across the Durand line in Pakistan. But
Right.
nobody wants to do that. So I think we are staring at facts, in the face, and we are closing our eyes, hoping that this storm will pass us by. It's not going to happen.
Sure. Okay. And Mr. Nair, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Stemming from what was just said about Taliban's barbarism and primitivism, what makes me very happy as an Indian is that we have given 3,000 scholarships to Afghan women to come and study in India. At the moment, in all, there are 15,000 Afghan students studying in India at the moment as we speak. But 3,000 women, this is an extension of our famous policy of Beti Bachao, Beti Patao, And now, having given these scholarships, it's not an end in itself to these women. Now, we are initiating vocational training programs, I mean, it's not just education is not enough. You see, you have to take them to the next step, you see. Because, we cannot just walk away from Afghanistan. Our relationship with Afghanistan is old. It did not start yesterday, unlike the Americans or the Russians, you see. So I am very happy about our commitments, social commitments, development objectives that we have set for Afghanistan. And I think we should continue on that path, especially doing things for Afghan women, considering that the Taliban's attitude to the women. Maybe we can produce, of course, the tragedy of shooting doesn't happen, I hope, but maybe we can produce hundreds of Malala Yousafs,
Right.
by helping these Afghan women. I mean, of course, setting apart the tragic shooting that happened to that Pakistani child,
Right.
So
Sure.
I'm sure that we should, the government will go ahead on the path that it has chosen to help the Afghan people.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Yes, an agreement has been signed between the government and the Taliban, and it's a step in the right direction. But how much of progress we will actually see remains to be seen, because the Taliban has not kept its side of the bargain, and that's something that the NATO and the West is really concerned about. As far as India is concerned, we need to continue to work with the people of Afghanistan, whose lives we've touched in all the provinces of Afghanistan, and ensure that that goodwill comes out, and just focus on our commitment towards Afghanistan and help the people in a time of need. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.